Hello. It has been a while. It's been 2 months. I did not expect to take a 2-month break. Life got in the way. I still run a full-time business with my personal training, online coaching, and writing. And unfortunately, because of that, the show had to take a backseat. I'm calling this season 2, the second wave, and I hope to get out consistent episodes going forward. And with that out of the way, we got to get back to the real stuff, the nitty-gritty. What you all come here for. Because even though it's been 2 months of me not doing any interviews and exposing you to new information and my perspective and relating to you, it's been 2 months of no shilling for big corporations. And that's what brings me the most sadness is every day I went without being on this microphone was a day I realized I wasn't spreading the good word. I wasn't defending the shareholders. I wasn't fighting for the things that matter in this world, like deforestation and gentrification. And with great honor, it brings me joy. It gives me a sense of purpose in life to talk about today's sponsor, which is inflation. It's the thing that we all know. It's the thing that we all love. And you know what? I'm kind of a free thinker. So during rampant inflation of the last few years, you know what? I didn't just drink the Kool-Aid and follow the sheep's perspective of, you know what, inflation being a bad thing. I was actually a bit sad recently that it's gone down. And it really is one of those things where I'm all about pushing yourself to the limits. And you never want to be comfortable in anything, even in your own skin. And with inflation, it really made everything, you know what? It made everything more difficult. And a lot of people pushed back on that and said, hey, with the rising cost of groceries, because of the greed of companies like corporations like Loblaws and Galen Weston, I can't afford to feed my family. And I heard that. I held space for it. But my response to that was, we'll work harder. And no one wants to hear that. No one wants to hear these days a young man without kids tell parents to work harder. And I just really don't want to live in that world. Because when I was younger, young men who were relatively successful and had minimum responsibilities told me what to do and shamed me all the time. And you know what it did? It made me a better man. Now, did I have to go to therapy to resolve some of those things? Sure. But I only went to therapy because, you know what? Society kind of forced me to go. Society said, you know what? Everyone has to go to therapy. You got to work on your baggage. You can't bring it into your next relationship. You can't project your insecurities on everyone. And although I disagreed with it, I did it. And it's one of my people-pleasing tendencies, is I did it for the people that I love the most. But if I'm being honest, should I have gone? No. Should I have stayed the same? Probably. Because at the end of the day, as long as I was getting stronger in the gym and taking longer ice baths and making more money, that's really what life is about. Now, to get back to inflation, one thing that I think is underrepresented when we talk about the value of inflation is even though your money is becoming less valuable, one little trick to inflation is just take on debt before inflation kicks in. If you took out $10,000 before the value of that $10,000 was rising due to inflation, say in a year, like that $10,000 was now worth $12,000, you still only owe $10,000. So you kind of got $2,000 for free. And this is the kind of free thinking outside of the box way that I like to think around here. And because inflation challenges me to be a better version of myself, I'm grateful for it. And I say we bring it back. God, I haven't done one of those in a while. They're a lot of fun. I really enjoy the people that I've ran into that didn't understand the bit at first, and they really believed it. So, you know what? The longer you believed in that, the more joy you brought into my heart. And actually, if you want to support the show, the only real way to support the show, word of mouth, tell people about it, share it. And then also, if you're interested in online coaching, you can look into what I offer with the show notes, where it'll give you a rundown of a questionnaire you need to fill out if you want to set up a complimentary call, if you need help with your training, your programming, your nutrition coaching, any of those things. I do take more of a client-centered approach to it. So I'm not just going to give you a meal plan, and I'm not going to be a drill sergeant, but I will work with you to help you achieve your goals, whether that be building muscle, weight loss, Now, again, if it's weight loss, if the only thing you care about is weight loss, you don't care about anything else, I'm probably not your guy. But if you want to modify your body composition in a sustainable way while getting more confidence in the gym and kind of feeling a sense of empowerment along the way, I can help you with that. If you want to get strong as hell in the gym, I can help you with that. And if you want to work towards a specific goal, whether it be strength, I've helped people with preparing for marathons. I actually ran a triathlon with a client recently. That was a mini triathlon, but not a huge one. But if you have a goal you want to work towards and you don't know where to get started, check out what I offer with online coaching in the show notes, and we can go from there. It's fully remote. It is going to be cheaper than working with any coach in person, and it's going to give you a lot more flexibility with you achieving your goals in a sustainable fashion. Roses and thorns, it's been a while, and I think it's time we do one. Now, there's been a lot of roses, a lot of thorns over the last few months because it's been several months, and as time does, it tends to kick you, and it tends to give you a lot of joy along the way. That's not a cool saying. I just thought of it, and you know what? Wasn't cooking there. My rose, what I'll say, is that I've had a mindset shift recently. Now, I wish I could say that I operated in abundance, and I wish I operated historically from a more secure place. Not true. I've actually operated a lot of my life from a place of fear, and how I'll describe it is that I've often behaved as if the other shoe is about to drop. I've actually had people say that to me in my relationships, like, you act as if you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. And that's true. Internally, I have operated that way. When things are going good, I wait for them to go bad. When things are going bad, I'm like, yeah, of course, things go bad. And I say that while acknowledging the truth that a lot of my life has gone quite well. And I've been decently successful, and I've always landed on my feet. And yet, for someone who talks about being evidence-based, the evidence of my life would dictate that, hey, things are going to be okay. And yet I still operate from a place of fear, and things will not be okay. And as if everything in the past is just sheer luck, and that, well, this next time is going to be the time it's not all okay. And I'm almost afraid that if I do act as if everything will be okay, then I'll be blindsided, and then it won't be okay. Now, if you are not a neurotic person and you are well adjusted to this world, I'm going to sound like I'm speaking complete gibberish. If you are more neurotic and you have anxiety and you've had some of these historical issues, it's going to feel like I'm speaking your language. And that's okay, whichever side of the fence you land on, because the point of the rose is that I've had a big mindset shift. I've challenged myself a lot in just basically breaking down that mindset, breaking down why I think that way, not letting it dominate my life. Now, does it still rear its ugly head often? Of course, but I question it a little more. I've had a lot of experiences in my life over the last year that have allowed me to, and that have encouraged me to. I've formed some good relationships that have created a base of security that allows me to do that. And I've become more secure in myself along the way. Still uncomfortable, still challenging, but more often than ever in my life, I do operate as if everything is going to be okay. And in my journaling recently, it's been the credo, if you will. It's been a lot of reminding myself that life is good and everything will be okay. With my girlfriend, we talk about it all the time. It's just, we might be complaining about our day, and we might look at each other and say, honestly, life is pretty fucking good. And for me right now, it is. And I have a lot of things to be grateful for. And I think when you operate from a place of fear, you can neglect the things that you are truly grateful for and all the amazing things in your life, because you're kind of just waiting for that other shoe to drop. And that is a massive rose. And it took a lot of fertilizing, and it took a lot of watering of that plant for it to grow, and it has grown. And I'm stoked about that. My rose is that my training and nutrition have been shit. And ever since I went to India, it's been really tough to get back into it. Gained a couple lbs in India, but I was eating like a king, or a maha, as they would say, a maharaja. I don't know why I put a Spanish accent on it. That was pathetic. I really tried to speak some words in Hindi when I was there, and I cannot pronounce them. It was sad. For someone who's half Indian, I've never felt more white in my life than when I went to India. I thought I was going to have a real, profound ancestral moment, and I just felt like a gringo the whole time. It was an interesting experience. But since getting back, it's been tough for me to get back to my training routine. This week was pretty good. I've been very busy, and the rose in this thorn is that it's the reminder that life comes in seasons. This has been a busy season, and with a busy season, things do have to be rearranged, right? Your plate doesn't grow as the seasons change. You just need to modify how you're filling it up. And sometimes that means I'm training less hard. Sometimes I'm putting a little bit less focus into my nutrition. For a while, I was really focused on Spanish. And then for 2 months, I had to peel it back. I went from doing multiple sessions per week or multiple lessons to like one or two. I wasn't practicing it as much on my own time, and that's okay. A lot of growth comes in spurts, right? If you think about your fitness journey, you've probably made a lot of your gains in seasons where like 3 months you were locked in, and then maybe for 2 months you kind of maintained. The worst place you can get to is where you are locked in for 3 months and then you completely give it up for 3 months to a year and you only have an all or nothing mentality. The rose in this thorn is reminding myself that it's not about turning the switch on or off. It's about turning the dial up and down. And I've had to turn down the dial of my fitness for the last little while. I couldn't really work out in India, which was a full 2 weeks. When I got back, my jet lag was brutal. Never experienced real jet lag in my life. And since being back, I haven't had a lot of great workouts. Last weekend, I had a couple. This week, I've had one, and I will get back to it. And I can feel that ramping up, but it's not been a comfortable feeling to gravitate to change seasons. And that's the thorn. It's never great when your training doesn't feel good, but it's been feeling better. So it's a thorn that has some budding roses on it, is what I'll say. With that all out of the way, we're going to get to today's episode. And today's episode is going to be with Gabrielle Fundaro. She is back for a second time. Last time we did an episode breaking down diet culture. Today is an episode based on RPE eating. This is a model that she created, and it's really about, if I can break it down into one sentence, it is, if tracking macros is like following a GPS, RPE eating is like learning the cartography of a map and learning the land in which that map represents so that you know how to navigate it with confidence and not being reliant on a bunch of external tools to make you feel comfortable with your nutrition. It's about learning how to trust and nourish yourself without having to track and have control over every morsel that goes in your food. And it's a method that I think, if you don't want to track calories forever, is a great option. And remember, it's not a method to accurately hit your macros without tracking them. It is a practice about building confidence in your ability to nourish yourself and be healthy and have a healthier body image along the way. So if that sounds like a cool idea and tool for you, definitely listen to this episode. We're going to be breaking it down. It's for an article that I'm writing for Precision Nutrition, and she helped me out. She's the creator of RPE Eating, and she is a wealth of knowledge and a pleasure to talk to. So without further ado, here's the interview with Gabrielle Fundardo, and I will see you on the other side to once again shill for the corporations and for 5 Elements Coaching Incorporation on how you can, donate some money to the shareholders, because at the end of the day, the whole point of this episode is for maximizing dividends. As always, I'll see you on the other side. Gabby, welcome back to the
Thank you.
podcast.
Thank you.
You are officially the first repeat guest of the
Oh,
show.
wow. Oh, that's an honor. I really appreciate it.
And I mean, I only have like 10 episodes, so you're like 20% of all the episodes right
Wow, we
now.
better make it a good one.
Well, last one was definitely a good one. And last one, if I recall, we definitely went on some tangents where it was not, I think it didn't go the way both of us expected
Yeah,
it
but
to
it
go.
was fantastic. Absolutely one of my favorites.
In the best way
Mhm.
possible. And I remember that where I was like, oh, this is actually just flowing now in a
Yes.
completely different way. So hopefully we can get back to that today and start talking about something that's
Mhm.
similar of what we talked about last time. But we're going to be talking about something that you've created, and it's an alternate to macro tracking, which is adjacent to what we had spoken about last time, where we were dissecting diet
Mhm.
culture. And obviously, when you're dissecting diet culture, macro tracking and calorie tracking is going to be at the forefront of that topic. But since we're not just here to complain about it and dissect about it, you, as a solutions oriented person, came up with an
Mhm.
alternative kind of system that people can use if they don't want to be focused so much on calorie tracking and macro tracking. And it's called RPE
Yeah.
eating or
It's
RPE eating.
RPE-eating. There's like an extended E because it's based on RPE. So yeah, I've got a little
Yeah.
bit of a play on words.
So I'll start off by asking this because there might be some listeners who don't even know what RPE is. So, like, can you describe RPE first, and then that we can obviously use that to extend in the conversation to this actual
Yeah,
tool itself?
absolutely. So RPE actually has its roots in rehabilitation. RPE stands for rate of perceived exertion, and it's a way for a person to numerically rate, so kind of like quantitatively rate the subjective experience of the level of discomfort that they're feeling. So the level of exertion, the level of effort. And some decades later, Mike Tusherer from Reactive Training Systems applied RPE to training in what he and Eric Helms and others have called auto-regulated training. So you are quantifying, you're rating your subjective level of effort in a set. And usually we're looking at RPE going from 6, being very easy, feels like a warm up, to 10, like my soul left my body. Um,
Oh, I know
yes,
those
yes,
sets.
exactly.
They're
Yeah. So
horrible.
it's a way also to make course corrections, to make adjustments to your pre-planned training intentions based on the information that you're getting from your body in that actual set. And so it's an alternative to just percentage based training where it's like, oh, I'm supposed to do 80% of my one rep max today. Well, your one rep max, if you tested it last, 3 months ago, and your sleep was way better and your nutrition was better and you had no stressors, and now you're sleep deprived and, you have been traveling a bunch or something and your stomach feels off, your one rep max is not going to be the same as it was 3 months ago. And so trying to hit that 80% may not be feasible. It may not be safe, and it may not be the most effective use of your time for that training session. And so if you use RPE instead, you can make an adjustment and say, well, this is what I was going for. But based on my warm up sets, I think that today's one rep max is actually lower than it was 3 months ago. And vice versa. If you're feeling like superhuman, then you want to make the most of that max test, of that maximal effort. And if it feels like your warm up sets are made of styrofoam, then you're like, yeah, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit more than what I had planned.
Yeah, because I think that's something people forget a lot about with maximal effort is that it is
Yes.
dynamic. Where, I mean, the most I've ever squatted in my life, I can't squat.
Yeah.
That's not my max
Mm-hmm.
right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you rigidly work off of that being your percentage, where this is more training related, but say my max squat ever I think was
Mm-hmm.
415. Now, if I were to work rigidly off of percentages of that, I often I think would be overdoing it because that's my one rep max of all
Sure.
time, but that's not my one rep max at all times. And right now, if I were like, hey, I'm going to do some sets at 80% of that, that would be way too
Mm-hmm.
much for what I could actually handle at the
Right.
moment. And I've always found RPE or RIR to be a lot more flexible and to teach people better about how they can actually perceive their level of
Yes.
effort because again, there are going to be some days where what used to be a 10 is now like an 8. And you want to take advantage of that. And there are some days what used to be an 8 is a 10, and you want to actually listen to your body there.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And we're using that biofeedback. So even though it's subjective, it's going to be more accurate than that assumption of, oh, an 80% should be this much weight.
So how did you come up with applying it to your diet? So you call it RPE eating, which is a very smart way to use it, because immediately it's recognizable for anyone in the fitness industry. It's immediately recognizable, because the moment I saw you talk about it, I was like, oh, that's genius. Like, that's a really good way to like transfer talking about RPE, which is a very accepted system to use to regulate your training. And, especially if you're really sciencey about it, like some people tend to be. Like, I've definitely gone through phases like that myself. Using an RPE for your diet can actually be a lot easier to digest and be like, oh, this is like some evidence-based stuff that I'm doing, or this is like, it's not just like tracking calories or being stuck in that. I'm actually auto-regulating my diet. So I'm curious to how you kind of came up with that, the system for applying it to anyone's diet or nutrition.
It started back in 2019 when I started writing and speaking about intuitive eating. And my intention really was just to clarify all the misconceptions and misinformation that were floating around about intuitive eating. And I wrote a piece called Intuition in Training and Eating. And I explained that intuitive eating doesn't mean that you're just eating whatever you feel like. The term intuition maybe wasn't the best way to label that, but it is a form of, it's intuitive eating is sort of a whole self-care framework, and something separate. But what I did was explain that the core skills of intuitive eating, some of the core skills, are centered around being able to accurately identify your internal signals. So we talk about interoceptive awareness and interoceptive sensitivity. So awareness is being able to perceive that there's a feeling, and then the sensitivity is the ability to accurately identify that feeling. So instead of feeling kind of like, I feel crummy today, I feel lonely, or I feel an internal physical sensation. Yeah, like I feel hunger. So
you're getting more specific with it, as opposed to like, I don't feel good, because that could mean a plethora of things.
And so when you were,
and that would be sensitivity.
Yes, exactly.
If you can, the more accurately you can identify what that feeling, negative or positive,
exactly. Is. And so it's relying on interoceptive awareness and sensitivity, that basically the ability to notice what's going on within yourself, your internal experience, and label it accurately, and then respond to that in an effective way. So if you are feeling an emotion, food might not be the most effective way to respond to that emotion. And if you are feeling hunger, if you're feeling physical hunger, you're able to identify that's separate from appetite. Like, hunger is the physiological need for food. Appetite is, I'm kind of in the mood to eat something. So it's building those skills and then putting them into practice so that you can accurately meet both your food and non-food needs. And what I did was I explained that that's the same thing that we're doing with auto-regulated training, which is now very widely accepted. But when it first entered the scene, it was also controversial and it was very misunderstood, because when people hear, oh, well, relying on your internal cues, that sounds like you're lifting based on your emotions, or you're eating based on your emotions. So I was trying to explain, no, it's we are still analyzing those internal cues and responding to them accurately based on our self-awareness, based on our nutritional knowledge, based on our knowledge of, progressive overload. So it is still an informed decision or set of decisions that we're making. It just so happens that we are making those decisions based on a different set of data, a different set of guidelines than if we're using macros or we're using percentage-based training. So that was back in 2019. And then in 2020, I think it was 2020 or 2021, I wrote an article for Barbend on how to navigate holiday eating. And that's when I first started talking about, well, eat based on hunger scale, so you aren't eating until you're uncomfortably full, but also you have an awareness of the nutritional qualities of food. And then I eventually gave a talk about applying that and its origins in RPE and autoregulated training. And that's how I came up with RPE eating, because I was like, oh, this is RPE based eating, and just smushes together really well.
So did you start using it on yourself?
Yeah. And I've done this in a few different ways. Like I've done it just as sort of an experiment, like to see what happens rather than any sort of intended outcome. And I did that at first and for the longest period of time, and really as sort of my alternative to macro tracking. But I started with the meals that I was really familiar with. And all I was really
Yeah.
doing is I was just saying like, well, I'm going to plate up like the macro planned meal that I had, but I'm just going to eat until I feel satisfied. I'm going to like stay tuned in. And then if I eat my meal and half hour later I'm still hungry, I'm going to go ahead and eat a little bit more, but I'm going to eat less than I ate for
Yeah.
my meal. And then after a few years, I ended up also using it. I have not intentionally changed my physique for a long time, but I wanted to experiment with a massing phase because I had been gifted a Costco pie. And I was like, oh, this is fantastic, but I'm the only person eating this. So I'm going to have, pie kind of just like when I feel like I have room for it and it sounds like something tasty to eat, and then see if I can do like a little bit of a massing phase, but with a focus on like building out glutes and hamstrings. And so that was a fun experiment. And, end of one, I took progress pictures, and there was definitely a difference. And it was just a fun experiment.
Wait, just from the pie?
Yeah, all I did, that was exactly it. I just, pie is very nutrient dense, very energy dense, not nutrient dense, very energy dense.
I was like, pie is very nutrient dense.
It's opposite. So it's very energy dense. And it's also a great practice in, just because something tastes good doesn't mean that I have to eat a huge amount of it. I can eat a few bites of it, and like those first few bites are the best. And when I notice that it doesn't taste
Speak
that
for yourself.
good, I know. Sometimes it's more fun.
What you're talking about.
No, I totally get it.
Okay, so time out. How long did this pie last? I guess it was Costco size.
Yes.
So what, you just added that to your diet every day? So you'd probably add X amount of extra energy.
Yeah.
And that would quantify in a massing phase.
Yes. Yeah. And you don't need that much. I had the pie frozen. And so I would just take a piece out, and eat it like throughout the day. So I would say, I mean, it took a while because it's a Costco sized pie. For people who are not familiar with Costco, that pie could have fed a family of 5 for 2 weeks, I'm sure.
Try to explain Costco to a European and watch their mind explode.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
So, because you said you haven't done any intentional body composition changes in a long time, other than this, which was a minor experiment. Mm-hmm. Now, that actually brings to another question about RP eating. Can it be used for body modification, or is it supposed to be inherently weight neutral?
I promote it as weight neutral because I am a weight neutral coach. That being said, I am not anti weight modification. I am just pro safe weight modification. And I compare weight modification, especially weight loss, to a contact sport. So there is inherent risk involved, but you can mitigate that risk through best practices and proper technique and protective equipment. And so the way that RPE works, because it removes macro tracking, which can contribute to the development of disordered eating in certain people, and it relies still on biofeedback and awareness of one's sort of like emotional or not, I should say like non-hunger triggers. It provides sort of a safety net that macro tracking alone doesn't provide. And it also removes some of those factors like the macro tracking that could put someone at risk depending on their background. If you have a person who has never tracked macros, is not trying to necessarily lose weight, just wants to learn about food and has minimal to no body dissatisfaction, macro tracking is probably not going to be a problem for that person. It could be a useful educational tool. But if you have a person who competes in weight class sports, that's already a risk factor, especially if it's something with a high power to weight ratio. If they have a history of disordered eating patterns from having competed in that sport, if they have,
Yeah.
a higher level of weight preoccupation, then those are all risk factors. And so to then add macro tracking to that because it's necessary for them to modify, their body weight as part of the sport, it's sort of an unnecessary addition. If that person instead, if we can say like, hey, let's look at the nutritional qualities of your food, which you already know. Let's look at your non-hunger triggers for eating that might lead you to eat beyond your energy needs. And let's rely on your biofeedback. So, having you reach a comfortable level of fullness or the absence of hunger, but not feeling really very full. And being very judicious about how we're tracking body weight if that's necessary, So it is something that I wouldn't say is going to be appropriate for like physique sports. It's not something that
Yeah.
is going to get you to your absolute leanest physique. But that's not its intention. In the same way that
Yeah.
physical therapy is not what we use to prep for a bodybuilding show. So
Yeah. That's a great
yeah,
example.
yeah. So that's why I want to emphasize that, like, what it really is intended to be a weight neutral approach. It is a safer alternative to macro tracking, but again, it has its limitations and appropriate applications.
The reason why I asked that is it's very common. If I work with a client who only cares about weight loss,
Mm-hmm.
I still will try not to start with macro tracking. It does become a second option or like final option if just nothing is working and they're immovable on it.
Mm-hmm.
Because my approach generally is, listen, if you can modify your body composition without tracking, that
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably better long term.
Yeah.
Because what I will say is, once you start macro tracking and the calorie tracking, it's actually pretty hard to stop
Yes.
if you have a body composition goal.
Mm-hmm.
Because which in some of the slides you sent me
Mm-hmm.
in prep for this podcast and just talking about RPE eating, I really liked the example you used of macro tracking would be like using a GPS.
Yes.
And once you start using a GPS, it is really hard to even fathom using a map ever again. And in this world, maybe we don't have to ever use maps again. But even as you pointed out, what happens if your phone dies? Like, we don't really learn the land in the way people would have had to before. And if we look at intuitive eating and using RPE based interoceptive awareness cues for your eating, that would be like really learning the land, and it takes way more effort, but you can still figure out where you are and not be dependent on having a food scale around you, tracking every morsel of food, needing all these external tools to make you feel some semblance of control. And if you have a body composition goal, and I know this myself, if you start tracking, and you're going to lose weight if you're accurate with it,
Mm-hmm.
and you're consistent with it. And for a lot of people, and you had mentioned this before, tracking macros and calories for a period of time can be incredibly helpful and educational, because you might have no idea what what the macronutrient compositions are of your diet and the energy densities of your diet, where you
Mm-hmm.
might realize, oh, I'm eating really healthy. And it's like, no one said you're not. You might be eating a lot of nutritious foods,
Right.
but it's really easy to overeat, especially if it's delicious. If it's prepared at a restaurant, you don't know what's going into it. And the other thing is, most people don't realize how little protein is in most diets. Like, I just got back from India. My favorite food on the planet, but I swear to God, it's one of the least protein dense cuisines I can even imagine. And I was trying to explain this to like the people that I was with, because I'm half Indian, and I've always noticed this when I'm at like with my Indian family and the meals. Like, I'm like, these are very high fat, high carb, low protein is what I would call an Indian cuisine by nature.
Yeah.
And if you were to think, oh, I'm having a little bit of chicken because I'm having chicken biryani, it's like you're having a very small amount, right? And if I've worked with South Asian clients before, I've had them track a little bit, and they're like, oh, wow, it is way lower in protein than I realized.
Yeah.
So it can be useful for that.
Mm-hmm.
But on the contrary, if you're dependent on that, and that's the only way that you can actually like monitor energy intake and macronutrients, then you really, to use the metaphor again, you you lose your ability to navigate the land without a GPS.
Exactly. And then that's where the fear comes in about shifting away from macros, because you feel like, and not even within the allegory, but like literally you feel lost. And it feels like you suddenly don't know how to eat without macros. You don't know what to put on a plate if it's not a meal that you've eaten 150 times. If you go to a restaurant or something, or you go out of the country, then it's like, I have no idea how much to eat. And people tend to lose touch with their hunger and their fullness signals because they have habituated eating at a specific time, and then the meal is done when the plate is clean. So they don't have to pay attention to their hunger and fullness signals. And they're eating for reasons that have nothing to do with hunger and fullness, because they haven't taken the time to analyze those non-hunger cues. They've usually internalized the message like, oh, you just, have to try harder. You just are not disciplined enough. And they don't realize that part of what's contributing to this oscillation between, I'm on plan or on track, or feeling completely out of control, is that reliance on macros. And so part of RP eating is a core skill of a larger overall process. Part of that process is being able to identify what actually is going on for you. What are those
Yeah.
cues, and then addressing those and meeting your needs more effectively so that you can eat for both satisfaction, something that sounds good and actually hits the spot, and satiety, which is that physical sensation of, oh, I'm not hungry anymore. And then you can move on from your meal. So you don't end up eating, an entire sleeve of Oreos and then feeling crummy. You can notice, oh, I tend to do this when I have the whole sleeve of Oreos in front of me and I'm watching TV and I don't feel well afterwards. I'm going to go ahead and still allow myself the Oreos, but I'm going to see how I feel if I eat 3 or 4 of them, or even 5, but in a way where I'm paying attention and I'm really enjoying them. And then we're getting to that, to integrate the physical sensations. I feel satisfied now. Those Oreos really hit the spot. Like 3 or 4, that was enough. I don't need to eat the whole sleeve because I can eat more later if I want to. But chances are, once you can have access to Oreos or whatever favorite food at any meal, it becomes less, it feels like it's less, I don't want to say addicting, but like people tend to feel like it has less sway over them. And they're like, oh, now I can just have bags of chips or whatever around the house and I can eat them whenever I want to.
Yeah. Well, that is, I remember I said this one time to a client where I was like, the expectation of flexible dieting is like, oh, I eat whatever I want all the time. And it's like, the reality of it is like, I had a handful of chips and it wasn't a whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's kind of the sweet spot of it. We're like, I had a couple Oreos and it didn't hijack my day.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Why is it that tends to happen? Not obviously not everyone that tends to happen with,
Mm-hmm.
but why is it on average when you kind of remove the taboo or you take the limit off of it and you increase access, which is what you had said, why does that tend to reduce the likelihood of just like overindulging in it?
It probably has a lot to do with that restriction and Last Supper effect. And removing
the Last Supper effect.
Yeah. So we're habituating it. We're removing the novelty. So it's, for one thing, novelty is something that can make a food more palatable, more attractive. It's something that I haven't had before, or it's something that I can only have, once a year. So that's part of it. We're removing that, where like you can have it literally anytime that you want. And so we remove, theoretically, part of the reward of having that food. And then the Last Supper effect is what we have named the cycle of restriction and then feeling like an out of control sort of eating experience, or overconsumption of the food. Overconsumption being subjective, but it's whatever you feel like it is. So
you know.
Yeah. So
you know when it's been overconsumed.
So you have this period of restriction, like this food is off limits. I can't control myself around it. that core belief of like, I just don't have enough willpower, self-control, whatever that belief is, inevitably you're going to be around that food and you will eat it because you love that food. And in most cases, you're going to have a plan to eat just a small amount of it, but that's not going to be enough. That's not going to be satisfying. And so you eat more and you break whatever rule you had originally set about actually two rules. The first rule, I'm not going to eat any of this. You broke that. Second rule, I'm only going to eat a small amount. You broke that. And now you get to the point where you're like, well, it doesn't matter now. I've already broken these rules. I might as well just eat as much as I want, regardless of how I feel, because I'm not going to allow myself to eat this food again. And so you have an uncomfortable amount of that food because you don't anticipate having it again in the future. And the cycle repeats. Another version of this I call eating around the food that you want. So say you want something like, mine used to be Reese's peanut butter cups. They're so good. So I
think we talked about this last time.
Yes. And so and I used to freeze my peanut butter. That's a little bit separate, but, instead of having a Reese's peanut butter cup, I would have a peanut butter sandwich. That really wouldn't hit the spot. So then I'd be like, well, maybe I'll have some cereal because it's a little bit sweet. That didn't hit the spot either. So maybe I'll make some chocolate milk or a protein shake. So you end up over consuming other types of foods. And even though you're physically full and maybe even uncomfortable, you still don't feel like satisfied mentally because you still want
you took the scenic route to still being
yes.
like feeling like you have that craving.
Yes.
Like you almost ate 2,000 calories to just not eat a damn Snickers bar.
Right.
And I've actually done that before too. I've never heard of a term for it, but both things you're talking about I've done quite a bit.
Same.
Like the Last Supper that's music to my ears. I've done that. It's bad music to my ears, but I've done that like 1,000 times where I'm like, you know what, this is the last time. And then you overeat it to such a degree.
Yep.
And then it's funny because right after that, it's almost reaffirmed where you feel so sick from how much you've overeaten. You're like, oh, I will never eat this again.
Yeah. Or
right. It's kind of like, it's like with a friend where you just overspend time with them. Like, I'm never going to see this person after this. And then after a month, you're like, I kind of miss them. Like, they're not that annoying anymore. Like I miss the charm, but when you overdo it for a full weekend, you're like, I'm not going to see this person for 3 months. And that's what my one friend said to me after we got back from India. I was that. I was his Last Supper. He's like, you won't see me until Christmas.
Oh man. Oh, that honesty.
Yeah.
Or you reaffirm that belief that you can't control yourself around this food, that you can't trust yourself. And so you dig the trench even deeper. And every time that happens, you think that you're gathering more evidence to support the notion that you can't control yourself around this food and you just need to try harder. When in fact, what you are doing is, just confirming that bias. But there's evidence. You have other evidence in your life of being able to eat something that was really tasty, and you ate a comfortable amount of it and you moved on. Or if you don't have a lot of that, then you need to give yourself the opportunity to collect that evidence by exposing yourself to these various foods. And can be in a progressive way. It doesn't have to be that you buy the whole package of Oreos or the big bag of chips. You can buy small amounts, but still giving yourself the opportunity to practice eating a comfortable amount and then practicing self-compassion and things like acceptance and other cognitive exercises when that doesn't happen, but to help challenge those core beliefs about your, so-called inherent limitations and character failings because you've eaten more than your intended number of Oreos.
Well, so you named a couple things that I intuitively did because my big dog was pizza. That was the one, that was my Reese's peanut butter cup. And I naturally, I don't know if I told you the story last time we had the pod, but I had this habit where I would just be like, I'm not eating pizza anymore. And then come the weekend, I'd order a large box, dummy the whole thing.
Yep.
It was actually a lot of fun. But now that I'm thinking about it, no. But so I would dummy it and then I'd be like, I'm not doing that again. And then I would just repeat that, right? Pretty standard. Nothing new under the sun here. But the thing that really helped was I started, because New York is the best for this, where they have walk-in slices everywhere. And I wish they
Oh
had
yeah.
more spaces. I love a nice walk-in slice.
Mm-hmm.
But in Toronto, there was one spot. There's a few, but there's one that it's a chain. And I went every day
Oh wow.
for a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I'm just going to get a walk-in slice,
Mm-hmm.
sit down there. I'm going to have this pizza, and then that's going to be my dinner.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's funny. It's a bit of a hybrid model because I did track the macros on it,
Mm-hmm.
where I was like, this is only 700 calories.
Yeah.
Like, this should not impact my body composition. I eat a lot of protein.
Mm-hmm.
My breakfast, my lunch are pretty protein overloaded. This would be a lower protein dinner.
Sure.
And if physics is real, this will not kill me.
Mm-hmm.
But in my mind, I was like, oh my God, if I have one, then the Last Supper effect kicks in. And then all of a sudden, you know what, I'm like a whole large box down.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, you know what, I'm going to do it as an experiment. And there's an inherent kind of control mechanism of just buying one slice. It's like getting a small bag of chips. You can't eat an entire family size one.
Mm-hmm.
And what was interesting was I wasn't as full as I normally would have been, because it's just not that filling of a meal, just one walk-in slice.
Yeah.
But then that weekend, I was like, where I was habituated to ordering a full, like, large box,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, the last thing in the world I want right now is a box of pizza.
Yeah.
Like, I was sick of it.
Yep.
And I remember I made dinner, and it kind of pissed me off. I'll be honest. Like, because I had the habit of treating myself with overindulging in like what I deemed junk food.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was a Saturday, and I was like, well, Saturdays is when I do this, but I didn't have the appetite for it.
Yep.
And I was like, this is kind of bugging me now. I like begrudgingly made a nutritious dinner.
Yeah.
Not because I was like, oh, I'm making a nutritious dinner, I'm going to feel good. I'm like, well, I don't really want to eat anything else. It's kind of pissing me off. This is a shitty Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like it's like I had my drugs, but I didn't want to do them.
Yeah.
I was like, this is pissing me off now. Mm-hmm. So I remember that happening, and I remember thinking, okay, this can be a very powerful method of like helping reshape your relationship with these foods.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting because it was a hybrid of like, I was still tracking, but I was almost tracking to validate my feelings,
mm-hmm.
where I was like, okay, I do feel okay.
Yeah.
And this was enough food. And technically, energy wise, it was a pretty standard dinner for me. It's like 700 to 1,000 calories.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't overdoing it. And I was like, oh, and that really helped in the long term, where I can actually eat pizza very easily now. Like, I just know it's not the most satiating meal.
Right. Yeah. But you can eat a comfortable amount, so you can actually enjoy it, and then you just move on with your life.
Yeah. That's all it was. And you expect it to be magical, but it's really just kind of like, it's mundane in how effective it is.
You know, that's something that I've experienced this, and I've had clients experience this, like falling out of infatuation with foods. And
yes,
and then it's like,
that's a great way of putting it.
It's not entertaining anymore. It's like,
no,
it can still be enjoyable, it can still be satisfying, but it is no longer, unless you're like a foodie and you go have like, you know, a fancy cool meal experience, but like day-to-day eating, it's no longer entertaining. It's no longer a proxy for other needs that need to be met in other ways. It just becomes food. And then it's like, well, what else? Now what do I do? Yeah. Now what do I do with my time? What do I do with my Saturday?
It's kind of like when you followed, like when you stop playing, when you stop chasing hot messes.
Yes.
Like straight up. And that's the first place my mind went, where you're like, when you're in a cycle of just chasing hot messes, you're like, I can fix them.
Yeah.
They're so hot. They're so mysterious. Oh, yeah. I can fix them.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And then when you realize the game after a couple cycles, you're like, listen, gorgeous person. Yeah. Hot mess. Like, I'm out. You're not enticed by that anymore. Right. And like, it is weird because you're like, you do interestingly get a lot of free time back.
Yeah.
In both scenarios, you get a lot of free time
and energy and mental space. Yeah, because you're like,
and you don't know what to do with it.
Yes, exactly. Because you're not telling yourself, oh, this time it's going to be different. You're like, no, I know it's not. Like going through repeating that cycle is going to repeat forever. And so, in like liberating yourself from that that process that monopolizes so much of your time and energy, sometimes it can feel like a little bit boring. is like,
Yeah.
and I went through a phase, and I've heard this from other people too that are like, I don't really know what to eat. And not that I don't know what to eat because I don't trust myself to be able to nourish myself. Just that nothing sounds super appealing right now. Like I'm physically hungry, but there's nothing
Mm,
that I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to eat whatever thing. It's just like, oh, well, I guess, this looks fine. And,
yeah.
but it's not necessarily a negative thing. It's just an adjustment to how food used to fit into your life. Like when
Yeah.
you were a teenager, you weren't like thinking about your next meal. It was just, your parents had to tell you like, hey, be home for dinner because you're busy playing and spending time with your
Yeah.
friends. And you're like, oh,
100%.
I got to come home and eat, what a chore. So it's getting back to that where it's like, okay, now you take time out to, yes, be intentional and enjoy your meal, but you have other things that you want to get back to doing. And like, those are the things that
Yeah.
are worth investing all that time and energy.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because it really was a chore
Yeah.
back in the day. Like, I'm thinking about being a kid. Dinner was the bane of my
Mm-hmm.
existence
Yeah.
because I was like, it just interrupted play.
Yes. Yes.
But then when you become like so deeply food focused, as
Mm-hmm.
I've spent a lot of my life, it's like you can't wait until the next
Yeah.
meal.
Yeah.
But I do remember periods of my life when I was a kid where I was like, dude, I hate dinner.
Mm-hmm.
All dinner means is that like whatever fun shit me and my friends were doing, we have to stop for like an
Yes.
hour
Yeah.
and then rush back out.
Yeah. But food then becomes like
The
the
play.
play, yes, because you don't allow
Yeah.
yourself to play, or food becomes the only time that you can rest. So like I've worked with clients who will only take, they'll take snack breaks when they're not hungry because they won't allow themselves to just take rest breaks. Like
That's why we need to bring back smoking.
you
Like
get
that's what
fresh air
happened.
too. You get to go
Yeah,
outside.
we got rid of the habit of smoking, and there was a vacuum that needed to be filled
Yes. Yeah.
with just mindless snacking.
Yeah. Because you are definitely not allowed to just sit and relax and do nothing. You're definitely not allowed to read or do anything that's enjoyable. It can either be
Yeah,
smoking or snacking. Those are your only options.
it's one of the two. Um, maybe the middle ground is vaping.
Okay,
We
sure.
don't know. We don't know the long term yet. We just live in that ignorant zone. So, with you, what was your journey like going from because you were like purely macros based for a long time,
Yeah.
and then it sounds like you did a lot of N of one
Mm-hmm.
where you're doing this on yourself and you're experimenting.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like for you going from being heavily macros based in how you track your own diet to applying? I don't know if you had called it RP eating yet, but more principles that would be falling under RP eating and like auto regulating your diet.
Yeah, I mean, it took years and it was like terrifying in the beginning. I can still remember, I think I might have been 32 or so. This is like 5 years ago that I saw that I had a problem with macro tracking. Like I
Mm,
wasn't, sticking to the macros. They're programmed for me. I was not sticking to them and I felt like it was impossible. And I was so frustrated with myself because I had been tracking macros since I was like 18 or 19. And for the longest time, it felt like something that I could adhere to. And it felt like it was very important, like essential. And that if I were to not track macros, there was no way that I could, fuel myself properly. I would lose my physique. But I didn't realize that it was an issue until I started to want to not do that anymore. And that conflicted with my reliance on needing to continue to do that. And so I ended up in this cycle of constantly, falling off plan, not tracking the macros or not following macros, feeling guilt and shame and feeling frustration with myself, blaming myself. And that lasted a long time. I mean, many, many months where I was stuck trying to get myself to continue tracking because I didn't understand like why it wasn't working anymore. And then that's when I started to learn more about intuitive eating, which was really just kind of coincidental. Like I wanted to learn about it because people were debating it and a lot of people were debating it who had no idea what it was. And then I
yeah.
started to put two and two together and realize like, oh, kind of the macro tracking is the problem. And my internalized fat phobia and the weight stigma, that's the problem. I'm afraid that I'm going to gain fat and then people won't take me seriously, and I won't be able to run my business, and I won't, be an attractive and valued member of society. And how can I have more body fat and still be an effective exercise science teacher, and so on. So I had to go through the process of challenging those beliefs and doing the N of one experiments, like, having peanut butter with every meal until I hated well, I didn't hate it, but until I was like, I don't want to eat peanut butter at every meal. Like, I can just have the peanut butter there.
That's saying a lot.
Yes. And it was like my favorite.
That's saying a lot.
Yeah. My favorite food. And now, like, I've had a jar of peanut butter in my cupboard for, I don't know, a couple of weeks. And like, I just forget that it's there, which is, to me now, thinking about it in context, is like, wow, I can't believe I'm here. I never believed that I would get to a place where I could have tasty food in the house and just eat a comfortable amount and then just be like, I don't want any more. I never thought that was going to happen. So I really did have to go through the process of practicing what I recommend, which is the food habituation, which is tuning into hunger and fullness signals, learning what my non-hunger cues were, learning my cycles, like where I would tend to have experience overconsumption, or like kind of a binge episode, and then address those. So it was like, now I understand. I used to travel a lot. And so one of my triggers, for example, was when I would get to a new place, I would eat an uncomfortable amount of food. And it happened like every time. My first thing was, okay, I'm going to eat a bunch of the groceries that I just bought. And I realized, it's because I'm feeling a little bit anxious. And and so what I need in that moment is not a bunch of food. I need to give myself some time to sit and breathe deeply and do something that helps me feel comfortable in this space. And almost immediately that stopped those binge episodes, because I was able to notice, that's what's going on here. And now, I haven't tracked macros in a few years now. And I've gone through some really difficult life circumstances that would not have been conducive to tracking macros anyway. And so I'm thankful that like that kind of already happened. But, those experiences also facilitated that full separation from any reliance on macros. And now every meal, I just know how much food I need to put on my plate. Both because I know the nutritional qualities of the food, and also because I know what is going to leave me feeling comfortable, but not overly full. And if I'm partway through my meal and I start to feel really full, I don't have to clean the plate. I can just say like, yes, I'm done.
Which, if you're used to being macros based like that, you just kind of follow the plan a little bit more robotically.
Yes.
Right. Where if it's on your plate, you finish it.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you're living in that, you're not in a weight neutral position where you're always trying to modify body composition. Mm-hmm. You want to make the most of like every meal, right? Because you're creating scarcity where it doesn't have to be there.
Yes, exactly.
So you will take advantage of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a multi-year process for you.
Yeah.
Now, when you realized, hey, these are the bigger things that are causing me to feel like I need to double down and change my body at all times, and maintain a certain body composition so that I can feel the worth that I maybe lack, or feel like I'm living up to whatever my title and identity is, right? So I think it's really common in our industry where if you don't look a certain way, it will hit on that insecurity of like, am I a good coach if I don't look a certain way? Now, when you started to realize that the problem wasn't that you weren't following your macros, the problems are that you were still tracking all the time and always in that state of changing body composition. Was it like, I want to stop tracking macros, or was it, you know what, I'm going to like kind of hybrid, or I'm going to do it less? Cause I've done that before where it's like, I only track dinner and I know what my breakfast and lunch is. And I go from there. Like, what was the process like to where you are now, which is a pretty big transformation for anyone who's ever had any problems with, managing their diet. You might hear, oh, you had a jar of peanut butter in your cupboard for 2 months. Who cares? For someone who's had some struggles with that, like that is a huge level of progress.
Yeah.
So what was the transition like from there?
Gosh, now I feel like it's been so long ago. I want to say, I know that I had a period of time where I was trying the hybrid approach of like, I'm just going to track protein, or I'm just going to track calories. But I did get to a point where I was like, I just don't want to do this anymore. Like, I want to be able to eat without tracking anything. And I, alongside that, I also wanted to feel more comfortable in my body. And for the longest time, I thought the only way for me to feel comfortable in my body is if I control its size, if it looks a certain way.
Yeah.
So what I did eventually, I went to that hybrid method for a little while and just was like, this still isn't it. Like, I want to be totally separate. And so then I started going to plate planning, and plate planning was I still stuck to a very limited variety of foods. I stuck to the foods that I was familiar with, but then I started doing, okay, a quarter of the plate for, starchy veggies and carbs, and then half the plate for fibrous veggies, and then proteins, and adding some fats in. And shifting more to focusing on like what was on my plate, having variety within the small number of foods that I was eating. I still wasn't really eating dessert. I wasn't going out to eat that much, but it was a graduation from like, I'm not tracking anything anymore. Now I'm fully going by plate planning. And that still felt to me like enough structure, and was still kind of like outside of my comfort zone, but in a way that wasn't beyond what my capabilities were at that time. And then I started to travel a ton, and it became increasingly difficult to do plate planning while traveling.
Yeah.
And also I was exposed to a bunch of novel foods, and, so there was like, oh, I want to try all of these things. And so then the goal became, okay, I still want to make sure that I'm getting protein at every meal, but now I'm actually going to have to, I can't clean the plate every time. I'm actually going to have to pay attention to when I'm feeling full or satisfied. Like, that's when going to have to be when I stop eating. So it was kind of the next skill that I worked on. But I still went through phases where, I felt anxious and like I needed to track again. And so there were even periods of time in the last, I would say, the first 3 years where I fluctuated back and forth and thought like, maybe I'll start tracking again. Maybe it'll be different this time. It was not different. It was not different that time. And then
it was the same old.
Yes.
It's like getting back together.
Yes, exactly.
You're like, oh, it'll be different. Yeah. You're like, no, it's the same.
Yeah, it's not exactly. And actually, I've made some posts now, and I have some coming up about how like a toxic relationship with food is very much like a toxic romantic relationship, where like they just keep pulling you back in. You think it's going to be different. There are so many false promises and, a false sense of security and whatnot. And the thought of letting go is so anxiety inducing. But then once you get out of it, and, you go to therapy and everything like that, you realize like, oh my gosh, that relationship was interfering with my overall quality of life. Like, things are so much better now.
But it's so familiar.
Yes.
So the moment, and it reminds me of what you're talking about, like when you would start traveling and then you notice the pattern that whenever you were to travel, you would kind of really overeat and overconsume a lot of food, whatever groceries you had ordered.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be similar to an initial reflection would be, well, I just shouldn't buy so much groceries, which could be a solution short-term, I guess. But instead you actually reflect like, well, actually what I'm doing is I'm using food to manage the anxiety that I feel when I travel. Exactly. And getting less food isn't actually going to attack the root struggle that I'm having, which is that I need to be able to manage my anxiety when I travel and I'm in uncertain situations, because you're going to continuously be in uncertain situations.
Right.
And to use the story of like how a toxic relationship with food is like a toxic relationship with anyone is, you know what, once you are out of it and then you start feeling uncomfortable again, familiarity is going to call back. And it's very enticing to go back to that old person or that old habit. It could be, at the moment you're out and you're eating a meal and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I feel a huge sense of losing control. It is it's an artificial sense of gaining control back by just typing it into MyFitnessPal.
Yes.
Or MacroFactor.
Yep.
Shout out to Greg. If I'm going to plug any calorie tracker, it would be that. But so it would be a false sense of control to get it back, but you really would just be ignoring, what's the real problem? The real problem is that like whenever I feel some level of uncertainty, I can never sit in it and I can never reflect on it.
Yeah.
But you can just grasp and to bring it back, you can grasp for a cigarette. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's a very similar thing that people do where, if you're a smoker, I assume the first thing you do when you get to a new country and feel anxious is just rip a pack.
Yes.
You might notice where you would smoke one, maybe you've actually finished 5
Mm-hmm.
and you chain because
Yeah.
you're like, oh, this is now dealing with that same level of discomfort, but
Right.
I'm using some sort of external device or mechanism that helps me cope with it other than actually facing the reality of it.
Yes, that's exactly it. And it's that sense of safety, of the familiarity, even though you can know that this person or this habit is not good for you. It's not like you're not
Mm-hmm.
aware that there are problems. It's just that the sense of control and safety that you get feels like it's worth all of the problems, even though
Yeah.
it's really not.
Short term, I've done that, and I still do that in some ways
Mm-hmm.
because that familiarity
Sure.
is very enticing in a time of like lacking control
Mm-hmm.
or perceived lack of control.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
So with RP eating and
Mm-hmm.
like, how does RP eating differ from intuitive eating? Because you've talked about that quite a
Sure.
bit.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if it does differ, because intuitive eating seems to be one of the most misunderstood topics currently in nutrition.
Yes.
I would say, at least from what I've seen.
Yes. So intuitive eating is used colloquially and often inaccurately by a lot of people that really just mean, like, oh, just eating when you're hungry until you feel satisfied. But intuitive eating, the actual like intuitive eating TM or C, I don't know which one, but the one that was developed by Evelyn Tribole and Marilyn Resch as I mentioned, it's a self-care framework. So it has been redone in the last few years, and they've changed sort of the specifics of the what used to be 10 kind of guideposts, but it goes beyond just the eating habit practice and also encompasses things like rejecting diet culture and practicing sort of, it falls within like a social narrative as well. So
Okay.
yeah,
I
so
didn't know that.
yeah, so because it's part of the weight neutral framework and Hayes and whatnot, so it is really also partially rejecting these social narratives that make people dissatisfied with their bodies, that make people want
Mm-hmm.
to continue dieting. And so it is about adopting a new set of beliefs. And they also have added other things about helping like your kids become intuitive eaters and whatnot. So intuitive eating is actually a whole framework, a whole large framework. Whereas RPE eating borrows from that. Like it is based on the research that intuitive eating is based on as well. So research into weight neutral approaches to health. And RPE eating is a core skill that is focused on being able to identify and quantify your levels of hunger and fullness. And if you do that within a weight focused paradigm, then you will aim for a specific number on the hunger and fullness scales. So if you are intending to reduce your body fat, then you're going to aim for a lower level of fullness. Out of 10, it might be something like a 4, or you're just feeling like
Mm-hmm.
absence of hunger, but you don't actually feel very full. And you might choose different foods than someone who is going for a massing phase. They might choose more energy dense foods and then go for maybe a level 5 or 6 on the fullness scale. But then also being able to identify, like when you get to a 2 on the hunger scale, and you're going to have a hard time making intentional decisions about your next meal. So maybe we avoid getting
Yeah.
to that point. We aim for getting to a 3. And it falls within the larger framework that I have recently rebranded and that I refer to as the trust and nourish method, because it's about first trusting your body and then nourishing it. But that's kind of step 1, is practicing RP eating so that you can accurately identify and respond to your hunger cues, and then be able to identify and respond to your non-hunger cues, because obviously we all eat for other reasons aside from feeling hungry, which then leads you into being able to meet your needs more effectively and then ultimately eat for both satisfaction and satiety. So it borrows from some of the philosophy of intuitive eating, but intuitive eating is a much larger framework, and intuitive eating is
Mm-hmm.
fully weight neutral, whereas RP eating could be applied for weight modification.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you would never use intuitive eating principles for actually intentionally changing body composition.
Correct. Yep. It is fully
Yeah.
100% weight neutral.
Because it sounds like it would be pretty hard to unless you were severely underweight, it'd be pretty hard, I think, to intuitively eat in a way that would change body composition.
Right, exactly. And that's because intuitive eating is intended to help heal the relationship with food. And part of that is responding to hunger and fullness cues. So, whereas a person who is practicing RP eating for weight modification might say, okay, well, I'm going to respond. I'm still going to eat because I'm hungry. I'm at a level 2.5 right now, but I'm only going to eat until I'm at a level 3 or 4. And I might still feel like a little bit, there might be room for some more food. But that was my intention because I have the intention of weight modification. Whereas a person practicing intuitive eating would still tune in to their internal cues and stop when they feel satisfied in most cases, but they wouldn't be doing that with the intention of, I'm going to choose less energy dense foods, or I'm going to stop before I feel like I'm at a complete level of physical satisfaction. I hope that makes sense. They're still very similar, but like it's also the intention behind it, that the person has the intention of weight modification with RP eating. And that is not an inappropriate application. Whereas intuitive eating would be an inappropriate application.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So I think for the majority of people that would be listening to this podcast, most of them probably have a history of tracking or have tracked at some point. Mm-hmm. So I'll make that general assumption, just knowing my audience. Mm-hmm. What would be some of your applications you would apply to a client if you were trying to migrate them from consistently tracking or a history of tracking to more of an RP eating based model of approaching their nutrition?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you had mentioned, kind of doing a hybrid model. So way back in the day, I also I think Shannon Beer, we developed like this.
Yeah, she was on the podcast.
Okay, yes, I thought so. So we had
second guest ever on the podcast.
Perfect. You have to have her on again, and then she and I can be like twin doubles.
Just taking up 40%. It'll become our podcast at that point.
Just the three of us can host together. But we had developed the spectrum of intentional eating. And so it's a spectrum of directionality in terms of like weight neutral or weight focused, and then internal versus external cues. And one of the nice things, one of the benefits about this spectrum is that because it's a spectrum, you can apply certain practices kind of across the lines in order to transition from one thing to another. So, for example, if we wanted to help a person who's tracking to start to integrate RP eating and move in that direction, they could continue to track. They could continue to, they continue to plate a macro plan meal. Say like, okay, this meal is supposed to have like 30 grams of protein, 60 grams of carbs, whatever. They have that meal, but they eat slowly, a little bit slower, and they notice, their intention is to notice when they feel satisfied and to not just clean the plate, because they can finish the rest later if they want to. And that's what I used to do. I would say like, okay, I'm not hungry enough to eat all this right now. If I want more of it later, then I'll have that later. Another thing that a person could do is they could swap something that sounds more appetizing. So one of the things that I point out is that the reason that sometimes we can feel physically full but not mentally satisfied is that we have ignored our appetite. We think the appetite is like the worst thing. We want to ignore it. We don't want it to influence our food decisions. But you can synthesize appetite and hunger. You can notice, like, what am I in the mood for? Do I want something crunchy or smooth or salty or cold? And then applying that to, okay, and now how hungry am I? How much of that food do I want to eat?
So appetite involves more desire, it sounds like.
Yes, exactly. So,
okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so you're basically...
Okay, so factoring in your desire for what you actually want.
Yes. So to say, hey...
Because if you feel a physical hunger pang, it doesn't always do it.
Exactly. So you could still say, I want to, fit within my macros, but like you did with the pizza, maybe they say, okay, I'm still going to fit into my macros, but this time if I want to have a couple Oreos, I'm going to have the couple of Oreos. And or what we have both done, like, okay, I'm going to allow myself to have my favorite food at every single meal, because
Yeah.
when I added my peanut butter toast to every meal, I was still tracking macros. So
Okay.
yeah, it just,
No, I mean, that sounds realistic.
mm-hmm.
That sounds like a realistic way that a lot of people would need
Yes,
to do it,
yeah,
because, it's easy to say, and it might be correct to say, you're still using the tracking as a crutch.
yes,
And it's like, well, sometimes you need a crutch
mm-hmm.
when you're progressing to walking without a crutch. Like,
Yeah,
you might go from 2 crutches to 1,
mm-hmm.
but like that's still progress, and it doesn't help to be told you're using that as a crutch if you're in the process of trying to get rid of it. It's
Yes,
not just, oh, I didn't know that I was using this as a crutch, and then you toss it,
mm-hmm.
right? You still need to expose yourself over time,
Yes,
so that you're like, you know what? Okay, I can do this without it. And
mm-hmm.
it sounds like it's interesting because we're using RPE, which is a training method.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like you're also kind of using progressive overload with your tolerance
Yes,
to uncomfortable situations with your eating, which is also maybe the most widely accepted
mm-hmm.
training terminology that people realize is crucial for making progress.
Exactly. You've just improved on the RPE eating model. So I'm going to have to credit you for that.
Let's go.
But yeah, no, that is exactly right. And I think that, people, when they hear things like, the, eating in response to like appetite and your internal cues, they think that it is too subjective or too emotional. And as I mentioned in the beginning, that's what people thought about using RPE in training as well. And like Mike Tusher has made videos explaining, no, it's not lifting based on your emotions. It is lifting based on your internal cues. It's lifting based on like, no, not how I feel emotionally today. But at the same time, acknowledging like, have I been under a lot of stress lately? That alone will inform my decision about whether I should adjust my training. Like maybe, in my warm up sets, I might aim a little bit lower because I can feel in my body that I'm tired. So we can apply that with eating as well. If I'm super tired, I know that I'm going to feel hungrier. I know that I'm going to want to eat more food during the day. So I might decide, okay, you know what, today I'm going to eat more. Or I might decide I'm going to take a nap because I know that I'm tired, and food isn't necessarily going to recuperate my energy levels in the same way that a nap would, or I'm super bored, or like the awareness of how your emotions and how external factors can influence how you want to eat and how you want to train. Because like if your gym crush walks in, you're probably going to want to be, all right, you know what? I'm going to load up the bar today. Like I know that it feels like I might have torn something last week, but today, I've got to show up. But being aware of that and being able to say, maybe that's not a good idea. Like if my gym crush is the one, they'll understand if I've got to like take something at the bar.
That's so healthy. I'm not there, but that's so healthy. No, okay. So, with the RPE thing, I think one thing that you pointed out is that people tend to point out that it's lifting or it's eating based off of your emotions and feelings, and that it's subjective, which I don't know. My first reflex to that is that's kind of true. Like there is a grain of truth in that, but that doesn't make it invalid.
Right.
Because we still are feelings based creatures at the end of the day.
Yes.
I don't know when that became incorrect to say that, where people are like,
right.
I'm like, feelings kind of does lead all of our behaviors. But it is imperfect and it is subjective, but that does get better with time.
Yes.
Because even with RPE, beginners tend to have a really poor accuracy with RPE, but you practice that skill over time and then it gets better. I assume RPE eating would fall into the same kind of principle of like you practice it and get better with time. Because if I'm thinking about when I started trying to intuitively eat and have better internal cues around my appetite, my RPE scale would have been pretty dog shit, to be honest.
Yeah.
I would have always been like, I could eat more. Like everything would have been a 5 or lower. And that probably just got better with time. No?
Yeah. Yeah. And they actually, part of the research that I based it on is on hunger training, is actually like helping people to identify their hunger cues. And so this was done in a few different groups in terms of metabolic health and body size. So it was people with a normal BMI and people who had obesity, people who had who were metabolically healthy, people who had prediabetes, and they gave them information about like here are the signs of initial hunger. They didn't do a whole scale for them, but they just at first were like, just notice when you're hungry. And then what they had them do was take their blood sugar to see, is your blood sugar low? Then that's another confirmation that it is time to eat. And so they also gave them information about like reasonable portion sizes. And this is all like stuff that we kind of know. I mean, many of us who have practiced counting macros for a really long time, like we almost have a Rolodex of macro content in food, you know? So like, it's not that there's a lack of nutritional knowledge there. But in these folks, there was a lack of nutritional knowledge. So they provided them with that. And they did see that people who had a normal BMI, they maintained their weight. People who had overweight or obesity had a reduction in body weight. And they also had improvements in their blood glucose and blood glucose regulation. So we see that there are improvements in metabolic health in people who require that. And we see that there's a maintenance of metabolic health and body weight in people who are already metabolically healthy and have a normal BMI. And that's just based on, hey, notice when you're hungry. And then here's education about like normal portions of food. And the people who kept a food diary had an even greater improvement in metabolic markers. And when they were able to like personalize that diary and say, you know, my stomach felt like this, and so I ate this much food, and then this is what happened with my blood sugar. And so that's part of the RPE eating practice, is keeping a food log like you keep a training log, to look back and say, oh, this amount of food like really tided me over, or this, you know, combination of, you know, whatever foods was so satisfying, and I'm going to keep that in my back pocket of like, this is one of my go-to meals. So it's something, it's a practice that gets better over time, and it will never be 100% perfect. But the other thing that I want to emphasize is that RP eating, the purpose is not to like accidentally hit your ideal macros. That is not
there's probably some people listening like, I can actually just do the same. I could apply this and hit my macros without having to track.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, that is not the point. If you try to do that, you still will be trying to count, and you're still going to be preoccupied about like, oh, but did I eat the right amount? It is not about that. It is about helping you to move away from that reliance and go and focus more on those internal cues. You still are using biofeedback. You can still look at things like your sleep quality, your energy levels throughout the day, your training sessions, and use that information to inform whether you might want to transition to some more energy dense foods. If you're feeling like, I'm not recovering, I'm super tired, not much else has changed. So, you know, or I'm way more active at work, I'm going to go ahead and swap out some of these foods for more energy dense options. You're still not counting things, but you are applying your nutritional knowledge to the self-awareness and biofeedback and making a correction.
Well, you're tracking, you're just not tracking calories.
Right. Yes. And that's another thing that I really emphasize. And I'm creating we'll have created a wellness tracker that helps people to focus on the actual outcomes. Like there's like exactly their energy levels, sleep quality, motivation to train. And so instead of tracking macros, instead of just tracking the inputs, we're saying like, how are you feeling based on what you're doing right now?
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, there will be a lot of people, I think, listening to this who are like, I do want to get away from that. So I wanted to try to paint as clear of a picture for them of, you know what, if they did want to stop tracking, because you can't just say stop tracking.
Right.
Right. It is, well, what can you do instead if you still want to feel like you're eating enough food and you're full enough and you want to trust yourself? Because I do like the rebranding of Trust and Nourish, because that seems to be the missing piece when someone really doesn't want to give up tracking. But like when there's ambivalence around tracking, I feel like trust is the thing that's missing in there.
Oh yeah.
And so what is the process like? The kind of last thing we'll kind of finish on here is like, what is the process like, and what are some key what are the key principles you would say if to someone who's like, Gabby, I know nothing about RP eating. I kind of want to, even if they didn't use that language, I want to adopt this approach. What would be the key principles? You'd be like, okay, cut out all the fluff that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
What are the key things that they would need to take away if they wanted to start applying it today?
Mm-hmm. The first step is having a foundation of focusing on improving body image. That is one of the,
Okay.
that's one of the,
I didn't expect that
yes,
answer.
because here's the thing, that lack of trust comes from really two areas, in my opinion. Lack of trust in yourself to be able to accurately identify and respond to hunger and fullness, kind of eat like quote unquote the right amount of food, and lack of trust in your ability to be resilient through the changes that might occur in your body, and your fears about how you will be perceived like in society as a whole, like trusting that you will be okay. So those are the two big things. You have to, like, I mean, you have to trust yourself that you will be able to nourish your body, and you have to trust yourself that you're going to be okay, even though things will probably change.
So it sounds like, because if those aren't like integral to this process,
Mm-hmm.
you're kind of still stuck in the same mindset that
Yes.
keeps you attached to macro tracking.
Yes, yeah, you're
Correct me if
still,
I'm wrong.
yes, you're still stuck in fear. So
Okay.
yeah, and like the fear can be present still. We're not saying like you're not going to be afraid. You can still have fear and anxiety. It's a big change. It's about helping to build that trust in yourself. That is like one of the core
Okay.
things. So even though like the practices are, identify your hunger and fullness signals, that's part of it. But then you also have to trust that you are accurately identifying those, and then
Yep.
trust that you will respond. And then the second skill is to identify your non-hunger triggers. Trust that you will be able to identify and meet other needs in more effective ways, like if you are feeling bored or lonely or something like that. And then that brings us to the third principle, which is meeting your true needs. So if you're really hungry, food is your true need. If you are feeling lonely or anxious or bored, you probably need connection or entertainment or mental stimulation. And then eating for satiety and satisfaction. So that's where we are not trying to ignore our appetite or suppress it. We are acknowledging and honoring what sounds really good, and we're applying our nutritional knowledge, and we are trusting that we're making wise decisions about our food and that we're eating in ways that support our overall well-being.
I mean, you knocked that out of the park. That's like, I was just listening. You were cooking there. Because I actually really did not expect the first principle to be that. But now that you said it, it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
I was thinking of more of a logical one of like what you would actually practice in terms
Mm-hmm.
of like the scale,
Mm-hmm.
like of the scale of 1 to 10 in hunger cues.
Mm-hmm.
But I do get that without those first two big rocks,
Mm-hmm.
it is kind of just another tool that would be used to manage hunger.
Yes.
Which a lot of macro tracking is. It's like eat a lot of fiber, eat a lot of protein, which is good advice in general. You should eat a lot of fiber and protein, but it's usually with the intention of just curbing hunger as much as possible.
Exactly.
But this isn't about that. It's about re-narrativizing your view of yourself in this world.
Yeah.
And then kind of challenging your lack of trust in that everything's going to be okay, even if your body changes. Because it sounds like a key part is accepting that change might happen.
Yes. Yeah. And change in your body, change in your perspectives, change in the way that food fits into your life. Like, it is a process of unlearning a whole system of beliefs that have kept you stuck and feeling sometimes trapped for months or years. So,
months is light work.
I know, right? Yeah. Like, really, if we're talking, we're years, decades.
I like, sit down. Yeah. You pay your dues. You got a couple years ahead of you.
But yeah, so that's why, like, part of the whole process is rooting the goals that a person sets, rooting like their intentions for, which one of these core skills they want to work on. It's rooted in their values. It's rooted in the unhelpful cycles, trying to address those and trying to embody more of the values that are important to them. There's no part of my process that is about a goal weight or a goal physique. It's just not something that fits into what I'm helping people with. Like, it's not about, like you mentioned, trying to manage hunger. It's about responding to hunger, and it's about nourishing, not suppressing, not controlling.
Well, if your previous thought was that you'll only be happy when you look a certain way, it sounds like if we could kind of quantify a goal of successful RP eating, it's realizing that a jar of peanut butter has been in your cupboard for 3 months and you forgot about it.
Yeah, it's realizing like, wow, I've been doing so many other cool things with my life. And
Yeah.
like eating is a cool thing that I do sometimes also, but it's not the thing that I live for anymore. It's not the thing that monopolizes my mental space and energy. And I'm not operating from a place of fear and anxiety and people pleasing. I'm operating from a place of authority in my own life. Like I know that I am nourishing myself well. I don't need someone else to give me macros to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Because I've done that before where it's like I'll feel out of control and then I'll type in, I'll reactively download an app, punch in what I've done in a day, and I'm like, okay, now I feel better.
Yeah.
But I've just used that external data to like justify my behavior as opposed to using your language again, trusting the fact that, hey, I ate enough. And if I ate more than I technically need, I trust that it's also going to be okay.
Yes, because like thinking about it long term. And I will say there was a period of time where I was tracking my weight because I was curious. This is probably like a year and a half or so ago. And I was like, well, I just, I don't care what happens either way. I'm just curious. And, this was.
No, I think it's a good practice.
Yeah. And I know that I'm in a place now where it's literally just a curiosity. And I was really surprised to see like how incredibly weight stable I was. And I know there were, there were days when I was eating to the point of like feeling very full, or I would go out to eat a few days of the week. And then there were other days where I would be super active and like, God, I gotta eat something, I'd throw something together really fast. And so I was probably under eating a little bit on those days. But like, I don't know when we got to the point where we got so granular about like, I have to eat the right amount at every meal. And, and even like the sport nutrition literature is saying it's not a 30-minute or even a 2-hour post-workout anabolic window. Like you have a lot of time. It's about like the average over time. And, yes, eating sufficient protein every several hours, but like this granularity for the vast majority of people, if you're not an athlete, if you're like a general population person who wants to, support their overall well-being, that is just not necessary.
I mean, let's be honest, even if you're an athlete, like DK Metcalf, one of the best receivers in the NFL, eats 2 bags of Starbursts every day and then just eats like a big ass steak.
Yeah,
you could do everything right and LeBron James will dunk on your head hungover.
Yeah, I don't think that they're tracking macros. Like I really don't foresee like the NHL players with no.
I have like one of my good buddies manages like the catering for the Raptors and like they're not walking in and being like putting food on a scale. Like they're just eating a lot of food.
Yes.
And it's not as granular. There are some, like, I think the 1% athletes of the world are a bit wild with it. Like, I do know LeBron tends to be quite neurotic with it, but he still is a big wine guy too.
Yeah.
So, like, no one's that perfect. And it's not going to be the game changer, which is always something people think really, if you do everything right. I'm like, it probably just bleeds into other areas of your life. Like if you're that obsessed with it, you're probably also that obsessed with your craft. Being that obsessed with your craft is actually the thing that's going to make you like way better. And a symptom of that might be being neurotically obsessed with eating the perfect diet for that.
But imagine if you are pouring like so much time and energy and effort into macro tracking and whatnot. Imagine like the cool things you could achieve if you were to do that in other areas.
Oh, 100%.
Like
you could hypothetically you could move to a different country and learn another language.
I mean, it's a good idea. I might consider that.
You could really think about it. Just sit on it for a little bit,
But no, I mean, really, that is like, I did not, I don't know the past tense of saying, like, I foregoed I forewent many things that I wanted to do because I was like, oh, that's too sedentary, or I don't have time because I have to go to the gym for 2 hours a day. And so like, I stopped a lot of the hobbies that I was developing and was pretty good at because I was like, the gym and macros took over my life. And now I literally am like, I'm learning another language and it's super fun. And I'm actually very good at it because I can apply myself with that level of intensity, but now I'm doing it in ways that are actually adding something to my life.
100%. Mm-hmm. So where can people, like, is there stuff that you sell or that you offer in terms of RP eating if someone has no idea?
Yeah.
They're like, okay, this all sounds good. I don't really want to do this on my own. Mm-hmm. What can be offered for them?
Yeah. So I actually have 2 courses on RPE eating. And I have, of course, like I mentioned, rebranding to Trust and Nourish method, but RPE eating is still what I'm using to describe those courses, even though it actually talks about all of the core skills. So I have one course for coaches that is really intensive. It's a little bit longer. It's intended to help you coach your clients to transition away from macros to RPE eating. Mm-hmm. And I also have a shorter one that's intended to be really just a 5-day course, about 20-25 minutes a day, with homework for just anyone else who wants to learn how to practice RP eating and the whole Trust and Nourish method. Mm-hmm. So identifying those hunger cues, non-hunger triggers, meeting true needs, and eating for satisfaction and satiety. So those can all be found at the link in my bio on Instagram. My new handle is trust_and_nourish.
And I'll put that in the show notes as well. Awesome. And when we promote the pod, like on my Instagram, we'll share each other's stuff again, and that'll all be in there. So anyone who's really intrigued by this stuff today and feels like, they want a deeper dive into the specifics, and any coaches who might be listening that want to actually like learn how to apply this with their clients as well, that'd be something I would definitely recommend. Cause I mean, you kind of created this model and you've been working on it for a long time.
Yeah.
It's not kind of created it. You did create it.
It's wild to think that it's been like so many years in the making now, but, I'm glad that is resonating with people. And, I have also like a few different free resources too. So if people just want to give it a little bit of a test run, I also have a free, 5-day challenge so that they can get lessons each day and just kind of,
amazing.
Yeah. See if that's the step that they want to take.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you for coming on again. I mean, at this rate, I'll see you in a few months. You'll be the first 3-timer on this show. So. We'll find something else to yap about. And thank you for coming on again, Gabby.
Absolutely pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Once again, thank you for listening to the 5 Elements podcast. Make sure to check out Gabrielle's work. Her Instagram will be in the show notes if you want to check it out. She has some free resources for using RPE eating in your own practice. And then also keep your eyes open for the article that I'm going to be writing for this. It'll be through Precision Nutrition. Again, if you're looking for help with your training or nutrition, check out what I offer with online coaching. That will also be in the show notes. And have a great day, and I'll see you next time.